And so I don't know for you guys, a lot of you in this room might be in a lot of different places on the spectrum when it comes to faith. Maybe you're someone who's just kind of checking things out. You're not even sure if you believe in God or not. Maybe you're a person who has been following Jesus for a while or anywhere in between. And I feel like when it comes to faith, there's a lot of things that I wrestle through and that I struggle with, and maybe you can relate. And one of the things that I have really been wrestling through with lately is this idea of suffering. How do we understand suffering in the context of faith? And I think about, this whole season we've gone through with Hurricane Harvey and the devastation that's brought to people here, but then not just here, there's devastation in Puerto Rico. There's all these different things going on, and that's just this one set of storms. But in addition to that, we see poverty, we see abuse, we see people who get sold into slavery. We know people who are diagnosed with cancer. We know parents who lose children. There's all of these things that happen in our world, and we look at that and we wonder how, if this loving God that we believe in, that we believe has been revealed to us through Jesus, if he exists, how do we view that and view suffering in the same lens? And so I've kind of looked at that and I've kind of said, okay, the best that we can do is just kind of look at what we have in front of us. Because to some extent, there are just things that we can't know because we're not God. And I think about the story of Job in the Old Testament. And I don't know if that's a story you've read before, if you're familiar with. But in this story, you have this man named Job. And there's this scene at the beginning that is kind of odd where this character, Satan, his name means the accuser. He comes before God and he says, hey, God, there's this guy named Job, and Job is really faithful to you, but that's only because he has this awesome life. He's been given all of these things. And if those things were to be taken from him, I don't think that he would choose to follow you. And so we read this story, and all of these terrible things start to happen to this character, Job. He experiences a lot of suffering, and his friends come to sit down and talk with him. And as they're talking with Job, they have this idea in their mind that they say, well, Job, if you're suffering, if bad things are happening to you, that is because you must have done something to sin against God, and God is punishing you for that. So you just need to repent. You just need to admit what you've done. And if you do that, then maybe this will go away. But Job, he's insisting, no, I did not do anything wrong. I do not have this sin against God. I promise it's not what this case is. His friends are like, you're lying. You're hiding something. You just need to admit it. And so as we go through this story, it's really interesting because in the end, when God starts talking, God basically chastises all of Job's friends and says, this whole idea that you have is completely wrong. Like, all of your answers that you came up with for suffering are bad. Like, none of your answers that you have really cover it. And the point being, Job never really gets an answer from God for the suffering. And I see the answer that this book in the Bible presents is really like, there is no just one perfect answer for why suffering exists. It's almost like this is an unanswerable question, and God is almost like, even if I did come down and give you an answer, you wouldn't even understand it. It wouldn't even make sense to you because you cannot see into the mind of God. And so I sit back and I look at the things we can know, and I'm like, okay, I know for a fact that bad things happen in this world. I've never once heard a person successfully argue a point that we live in a perfect world where nothing bad happens. I don't think I've ever even heard someone try to do that.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah.
No.
So I say, okay, so we live in a world where bad things happen. And in my mind, that means there are only three things that are possible. The first one would be, well, God doesn't exist. And some people choose that to be their answer. The reason bad things happen is because God doesn't exist. And when I look at everything around me, again, like I said, I can only look at what I have to see, what I have to be able to know. And I'm just like, man, when I see the way that this universe is structured, the systems that are in place, when I experience relationships with people, when I see God moving in front of me, I'm just like, there is so much that seems so clear to me that can't be the answer, that there's no God. So then I'm like, okay, well then maybe the second option is there is a God, but he's just like a massive troll. He's just up there like toying with us. How can I torture these people?
Hey, my homecoming story, that's what it felt like.
Yeah. But again, I look at what I have in front of me and I see what I have experienced, a God who loves me. I've experienced forgiveness. I've seen myself change for the better because of Jesus. I experience love pouring out from people who follow Jesus. And like you said, I've seen myself become more compassionate, more empathetic, understanding my identity. And I've had so much experience of a loving God. There's not evidence to show me that there is a God that's evil. So that means the only option I have left is that there is a loving God who exists, and at the same time, bad things happen in our world, and in some way I don't fully understand, those two things can and do exist together. And at the end of the day, this is the contradiction we live in, but I'm wondering if we're asking the wrong question.
Right.
Like, if maybe the question we're asking, why does this stuff happen, is not the right question, because not only could we never know the answer to that unless God just decides to, like, come down in front of us and just say, this is exactly why this happened. We could never know.
And would that even help? Would that answer even make us feel better?
Would it even help? And maybe is the right question, what can God do with this? Because the whole story of Jesus is bringing light into darkness, bringing good from the bad, like redeeming brokenness. And what if the true answer, as I look around, is what can God do with this? How can God use this to change me? And ultimately, if we realize that God has addressed this problem of suffering in our world through Jesus, and we know that we have something to look forward to one day where we will exist in a reality where all suffering and death and evil has been eradicated, that God has dealt with it once and for all.
Right. And ultimately, we worship a God who, instead of just giving us answers to why this happened, he stepped down into our world and suffered with us. I mean, that's what we see in the cross, is a God who doesn't just be like, well, suffering happens because of this. He goes, no, like, I'm going to suffer with you and for you. And I find that really compelling.